With a show that has such a rich history as Doctor Who, there are bound to be some episodes that shine brighter than others. Everyone has a favourite Doctor Who episode, and every Doctor Who episode is someone's favourite. Whilst Heaven Sent has climbed the ranks and established itself as one of the most well-regarded episodes, I personally believe it to be second to one particular episode, Midnight. Midnight is the 10th episode of the 4th series of the revived era of Doctor Who. This companion light episode centres around the 10th Doctor finding himself trapped with a group of strangers during a tour of an inhospitable planet. The episode is a marked departure from Doctor Who, featuring no proper companion or even monster. So what makes it so great? Midnight is a masterfully written episode that explores the natural paranoia and mistrust present within every person. It is an examination of self-preservation and human survival instinct. At the start of the episode, we meet the characters involved. From the Professor to the family, everyone seems to be completely normal, but they all show their true natures when the situation spirals out of control. They all quickly turn on the smartest person in the room, the 10th Doctor. It is often said that you should never try to be the smartest person in the room, and Midnight is a prime example of this. The smartest person usually becomes a leading figure in a group, but as soon as anything bad happens, they are held responsible. Look no further than The Apprentice, where the project manager is immediately thrown under the bus if their team loses. It is almost instinctive to blame the person with the most power in order to save your own skin. This is precisely what happens in Midnight. The Doctor is naturally a leading figure of authority. Even though some incarnations are more distant and reserved, it is part of the character's very core to take charge and assume leadership in most situations. Therefore, it is not at all surprising that the 10th Doctor appoints himself as the leader in Midnight, especially because he has extensive experience in these situations. Therefore, when things start to spiral further and further out of control, everyone immediately turns on the Doctor because he is in a position of power. They fear him because he knows more than them. The 10th Doctor's friendly yet commanding personality works against him because the other characters become convinced that he is involved with the Midnight entity and that killing him would save them.
You were talking to that Sky woman, the two of you together. I saw you.
Yeah, well, we all did. And you went into the cabin.
What were you saying to her?
I was just talking.
Saying what?
This is a prime example of how desperation to survive can produce deadly paranoia that is almost more dangerous than the actual threat itself. The threat in Midnight is highly unconventional. Unlike almost every other Doctor Who episode, you don't actually see the monster in Midnight. This adds a lot to the episode because it furthers the paranoia and psychological horror of the story. The lack of a visual threat plays on humanity's innate fear of the unknown, much like the iconic Weeping Angels, whose true form is unknown. The inability to identify the Midnight entity increases its terrifying nature because there is no way to fight it. You don't know what you're up against. On top of this, what little we do know about the Midnight entity is chilling in its own regard. A focal point of the episode is the possession of Skye Silvestri. When the Midnight entity attacks the shuttle, Skye is convinced that it is after her, and indeed, when the dust has settled, the unseen monster has somehow taken control of her, using her as a vessel. Possessions have been a fixture of horror stories for centuries. From holy texts to The Exorcist, the concept of possessions play on the natural, instinctive fear of not being in control of your own body. By possessing Skye and stealing her voice, the Midnight entity strips her very identity, hollowing her out. The Midnight entity uses Skye to rapidly develop knowledge of human speech and language.
What is that, learning? What is that, learning? Copying? Copying? Absorbing? Absorbing?
This, in turn, gives way to the possessed Skye being able to convince the group to kill the Doctor. This creates the terrifying possibility of the Midnight Entity using Skye or any other vessel to integrate itself into the human race and do God knows what, because it can keep changing host. The Midnight Entity seems to capitalize on emotions to gain access to people. First, it possesses Skye, who is recovering from a relationship breakup, making her more obviously emotionally vulnerable than the other passengers. The Midnight Entity also gains some level of control over the 10th Doctor himself. The 10th Doctor is arguably one of the most human incarnations, and as a result, he is more emotional. This makes it easier for the Midnight Entity to gain access to him. Additionally, the Midnight Entity capitalizes on the group's increased paranoia and mistrust of the Doctor to divert their attention, knowing that they'd kill him, thereby eliminating its only obstacle and allowing it to escape into the human race, whilst the only person who knows the truth is cast out onto the deadly planetary surface. The setting of the iconic episode is one of its strongest elements. The planet Midnight is an amazing science fiction concept. The planet is made almost entirely of diamond, but it is deadly due to the intense radiation of its parent star. This is a beautifully ironic twist because humankind highly covets diamonds, but they cannot really mine these ones. However, the setting of the planet itself comes second to the Crusader 50 shuttle, where almost the entire episode takes place. Much like the first Doctor serial Edge of Destruction, limiting a story to one set forces the writer to be much more creative in their use of the setting to emphasize character interactions and create a tense atmosphere. It really challenges the writer to think about how they can use such a restrictive setting effectively. It is why Reservoir Dogs is one of the greatest movies ever made, because the limited setting means that Tarantino puts significant effort into the dialogue and characters, really building them up and creating a constant tense atmosphere throughout. It is one of those writing challenges that force the writer to go above and beyond rather than taking the easy route. Midnight is one of Russell T Davies' greatest scripts. He uses the cramped shuttle setting to create a claustrophobic, tense story that takes an in-depth look at basic human instinct and the 10th Doctor's humanity as mentioned earlier. The stellar writing of the episode is really brought to life by the superb directing of Alice Troughton. The directing really does a great job in bringing out the claustrophobic paranoia. By filming the episode in chronological order, it is highly possible that some of the chaotic weariness of the characters is actually rooted in reality, creating a highly effective downward spiral as the time passes. All the performances in the episode are fantastic, especially those of David Tennant and Leslie Sharp, the latter of whom had to learn almost the entire script in order to repeat every word, along with having to match Tennant's lines as he spoke them.
On recall, I can get it at a certain speed, but David and I had to do it like that, and I had to really kind of keep going through it in my head to make it come out quickly. 2981671. Sorry.
On top of this, the crew had to film a number of scenes multiple times, each time with only one cast member actually speaking.
So you would do a take all together, overlapping, people coming in and out. And then he would say, no, right, now we're going to do Lindsay. And so she would be the only one to speak.
I want him out! Get him out! Throw him out! Get him out!
Much like the writing, the limiting setting really challenges the entire cast and crew to step far out of their comfort zone and try to fully utilize the setting, using it to its maximum potential. Midnight is truly an experimental masterpiece. The writing, directing, acting and score all combine seamlessly to form a superb short psychological horror film that can be watched and enjoyed by anyone, even people who couldn't care less about Doctor Who. It is gripping on the first and fifth viewing, and it still shines over a decade later. The episode is a terrifying examination of humanity's often selfish survival instinct and how it can corrupt anyone. The possibility of the Doctor getting thrown out of the shuttle is such a tense and heart-racing scene, and Davies wraps up the episode with one more jab at humanity.
The hostess. What was her name?
I don't know.
Before finishing with another brief exploration of the 10th Doctor's deep emotional vulnerability.
Molto bene.
Molto bene.
Dope.